Well, we were just talking about some of the totally awesome Fox West Theater classic items that we have here, including the robe. And what is this, Chris?
This is a map of Trinidad that was hanging in the office. Everybody in town knows Sally and Marie Savoya operated the Fox West Theater as a movie theater starting in 1959. This is from their office, but it's probably from much earlier than that. I've tried to figure it out a few times.
1933 is what I'm reading.
There you go.
I think my house is on here. You know, at least my sewer system is, if you know what I mean. So that's beautiful, and it's totally awesome. I saw a Butterfinger candy bar box from at least 65 years ago, not full of candy, but that's where my heart lies.
And there's so many artifacts at the Fox West Theater that Trinidad is blessed to have the collection we do. A lot of this stuff got tossed in the dumpsters through the years. Like this. This is a ticket-taking stand.
Oh, okay.
And right before we went live, I was trying to open the door on the side just to make sure it's not full of ticket stubs or money. And finally, maybe what's coolest, everybody's wondering, is this really one of the seats from the theater? The original seats in the theater do have these wooden arms and the metal legs, but Sally and Marie Savoya had these made up, and the upholstery job has been protected by plastic since the 70s.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
Because it looks almost new. It's amazing. You wouldn't think it was from a theater from 50 years ago or whatever that timeline may be. It's really awesome.
So again, folks, not only is the Fox West Theater really unique for the building that it is and who played it on the stage, but for the extensive collection that we have, I don't think there's anywhere else like it in the world.
It's really great. I love seeing all this stuff. I was just walking around through the arrangement of items, and I can't wait to see it sort of curated. Every single thing that I looked at was interesting, and I want someone I can't wait till somebody with more time than me gets to go through and arrange it. It's going to be such a beautiful thing.
That's right, and we welcome, if there are any historians, amateur or professional, that would like to help us with the archiving of this material, your efforts are more than welcome.
That's right. It's really a community effort here in Trinidad. And so we're looking, what skills do you have? We can use them. So just get in and let us know. Get in those comments or that email, foxwesttheater@gmail.com. Follow the YouTube pages to sort of keep up with what's going on with all this stuff.
That's right. And I'm going to make two quick thank yous. Holloway Video, and Elizabeth Holloway is producing this. We are super thankful to her. And as well, I'm the only on-camera guest tonight. So I want to say thank you to Jay Gillespie. Please do follow him on Facebook and his program, one of Trinidad's treasures.
Well, that's very nice of you to say. Thank you so much. Always great. Always great. And this is so much fun tonight. I love being here. I love working with these people, and I love working on this project. Some of the other people that sort of feel that same way are the Fox West Theater Alliance board members. And so we know some of them are watching tonight, and we're just so grateful for what they're doing. This is a new nonprofit organization driving the new life of the Fox West. It's such a jewel here in Trinidad, and these are the people that are working every day to sort of get it back to its full glory, which we're so excited for. And that includes the co-presidents of the Fox West Theater Alliance, which is Kurt Wallach and Suzanne Magnuson. So thank you so much to them. And then we also have our vice president, Gina Chimino. We have Myland Pride doing the treasury. Stephanie Backen is the secretary there. And then the board members, Lou Simpleman, Christina Duran, Jerry Campbell, Jim Martoya, and Martha Fitzgerald. So just so much thanks to them for the work that they're doing to preserve this historic theater. We're so grateful for their efforts. And just, once again, thank you for what you do. As part of tonight's program at 6, we are going to be hearing from Dr. Wendy Waszut-Barrett of Historic Stage Services. She's a part of Trinidad State College's Visiting Artist Lecture Series. And so we're so glad to have her here. And that lecture series is made possible through the support of a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. So we're so excited to have her speaking tonight. And if I'm not mistaken, she's going to speak now, or is that all happening at 6? So she is going to speak right now. Dr. Barrett, are you there? Can you hear me? Yes. As you know, the pleasures of Zoom. We're so glad to have it, and we're just making sure it's happening. And we are excited. She's going to speak on some of the backdrops, hand-painted, beautiful backdrops, some of which that haven't, as I understand it, been seen in 100 years. And that's one of the amazing things about this theater is, we were talking about the archives. In addition to this, there's stage play backdrops and things like that.
I'm here.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Barrett. We're so glad to have you here.
My apologies. You can see me if you unvideo me too.
That sounds great. We will try to show that video. I've been told to ask you to start there.
I'm all set.
Beautiful.
How are you tonight?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for being here. I'm super excited to hear what you have to say.
You're welcome. Well, I mean, one of the things is what makes the Fox West so special is it puts it within American culture and American history, where it's not just about a community, it's much more than that. It connects you to the region and nationally and internationally. And that's how special the Fox West is, because it's that perfect period of time where it's not just about theater productions that were at the theater. It's about all of the other activities that drew people together and unified them in a public space. And Ed West's theater helped facilitate that. So tonight, when I speak, you'll find out a little about me and what I bring to the project. And then also why the Fox West backstage area is so very important and is much more than just theater. The Scenic Artists had a baseball team in Kansas City, so you can find out more about that too. That's it.
That sounds great. I'm so excited to see your lecture tonight. I'm calling it a lecture and artifacts. I'm making up my own verbiage here when it comes, but I'm super excited to hear that. And it is interesting that it is more than just a movie theater, and before that a theater, that in that time Trinidad was such a growing city, and that was really one of the centers of that. And so, it'll be great to sort of reintroduce that. And if I'm not mistaken, that's what we're shooting for. We're shooting for a community space. We're shooting for a place where the arts can thrive and things like that. And this is such a fun initiative for that. And I'm very excited. So coming up next, we are going to be hearing from Gregory Friesen, who is the project architect of this, which I'm sure is quite the job. This is a historic building. I'm sure y'all all know that, and it is not going to be probably the simplest task. So we're excited for Gregory Friesen to give a presentation. Are you there, Gregory?
I am here.
That sounds great. Well, if you're ready, why don't you take it away and, let us know sort of what's going to be happening at the Fox West Theater.
A summary or the slides that have been prepared?
I believe the full presentation, the slides that have been prepared. We are ready for that. Excellent.
So you're controlling them on your side, right?
I believe we can share them from our side, and we are working on that right now. So I think we're getting that queued up onto Zoom, and then you'll just let us know once that's ready when you need the slides changed. So we are Holloway Video's chief executive is currently getting that ready, and
well, here it is.
Excellent.
Wonderful photo of the theater. If we were to go there today, it would be quite different because some of those curtains have been dropped as part of an ongoing, what is starting a conservation preservation effort. Let's go to the next slide, please, and I'll just describe where we're at in the project. So these are colored diagrams, floor plans, ballroom level, which is the basement, starts at the left. theater level. That's the main theater. When you come in the front doors, walk through the lobby, you can see all the seats of the theater auditorium and the stage in the back. Balcony level is the first balcony. So what's shown here in the orange color, at least on my screen, is phase one. Phase one is we're just starting this. We are restoring the original retail storefronts along Main Street to their original appearance. And they will be made available to a tenant. So hopefully there will be two really interesting new retail, possibly food and beverage venues on Main Street in the Fox West Theater. So what are we doing? Other than restoring the retail storefronts, we're bringing new electricity into the building, all the new water lines that we need for drinking water and wastewater. We are bringing in fire protection system. We're starting to replace all of the roofs and rehabilitating all of the exterior doors and windows. The blue will be the next phase. The date of that has not been determined. And finally, the yellow, which is the main theater auditorium, will be the last phase. The reason it's the last phase is that all of the air conditioning and heating equipment that we need for the theater auditorium cannot be placed in the theater itself. It will be located in an addition to the west of the theater. That's shown in the blue. Once that has been constructed and the heating and air conditioning elements have been installed, that will allow us to run the ducts from those into the theater auditorium. This next slide shows a close-up of the new retail storefront bays along Main Street. I'm seeing a partial image. You go to number 3, please, the next slide. There we go. These will be available in June. These will be online and occupied in June of this year. Let's go to the next one and describe what we're doing. Can we go to slide 4, please? There we go. So in the middle on the left is an excerpt from an original construction drawing, and we're very lucky to have this. This is the original blueprint, so to speak, that was used to construct the building. In the upper left-hand corner of this image is an early photo of what the Main Street face of the building looked like. In the lower left-hand corner, you can see an excerpt from our 3D building model that shows how the Main Street facade will look just like the photo at the upper left-hand corner, and the original elevation or building face view, which is in the middle at the top. And then in the lower right, we have an excerpt from our construction documents that will be submitted for building permit review and approval on Monday. So it's pretty exciting that we have all of these resources, starting with original construction documents, including a few early historic photos that will enable us to reconstruct the facade so that this fall you'll be able to walk by the building as though you were walking by it in 1910. Let's look at slide 5, and that's pretty exciting. Can we go to the next slide, please? So these are just some photos of exterior windows that really need some care. We'll be rehabilitating the original wood windows. The elevations show the windows, and what we call are these building faces are called elevations. Architects call those elevations. The exterior building face drawings we call elevations, and they show all of the doors and windows. These drawings are made from the original construction drawings. And at the left, you can see some of the windows they're really deteriorated. Some of them are missing completely, and the opening is protected only by, it's boarded up. And some of the other windows, even though they look pretty bad, once the paint is scraped and some of the wood is dried out and any cracks and fissures have been filled in, we'll be able to repaint those, reputty the glass, keep the original glass that's there now. And then for security, we will be installing behind these windows laminated security glass to prevent people from breaking in, because the historic windows are fairly fragile. Let's go to number 6, please. We just looked at that one. Let's go to 7. These are kind of views looking at it from an angle. If you be across the street, on the left, you can see a view of the building as it looks today, and you notice the marquee is on there. The marquee will be removed because it was not original to the building. If you're in town, if you're in Trinidad, you will see that coming down in the next several months. And then the view on the right shows the new addition that will be built in what is kind of a hole, or the yard, that depressed yard that's west of the theater. Let's look at number 8, please. Yeah, so at this point, what we're interested in is hearing any comments that you have. How do you feel about the restoration? Are there any things you want us to consider? Are there any uses when we renovate the interior? Are there any uses that would benefit the community? Help us think about this building and just share with us some of your thoughts.
Indeed. And we are looking for any input from the audience who is viewing right now. Once again, you can go on the Fox West Theater Facebook page. You can go, or you can email us at foxwesttheater@gmail.com to get those questions in. And I believe Gregory Friesen would be happy to answer those. I think we have a few questions that we had gotten earlier, so I think that I'll ask a couple of those. Some people were wondering about the concession stand and where that's going to be located once the building is renovated.
Well, the concession stand was not original to the 1910 building. It's actually eventually going to be right behind you.
Fair. I turned to look to see where that place was. Okay, so it'll be a part of the archives and won't be a part of the actual theater.
That's correct, unless we find a very creative way to reuse it in the addition.
Sure, and that makes sense. Another question that was asked, and I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but they were asking about the rental rates. Who will be in charge of setting those, or who they would be contacting for that?
That will be the Fox West Theater Alliance, working through urban neighborhoods, and in cooperation with the city of Trinidad will establish those rates.
Okay, and you said that we're looking to have those storefronts open by this summer?
by this summer, and here's what is triggering that. One of the grant sources that has provided some of the money that's been used, it is being used to restore those facades, was provided by a program from the Colorado Department of Local Affairs called the Colorado Heritage Energy Pilot Program. That's quite a big mouthful. That is a program that has targeted 4 historic buildings around Colorado and for the purpose of having their renovation demonstrate how historic buildings can be propelled into the 21st century and can include energy conservation measures. Well, one requirement of receiving that grant was that the retail storefront bays must be generating income by the end of June this year. So we're all working very diligently to comply with that requirement and to make that happen for the city of Trinidad. I've lost your audio.
So that'll be really beautiful. Another question that we're getting from some of our viewers is, what about parking? It's going to see, there's going to be quite a lot going on there, a lot of seats in the theater. And what is your plan as far as parking goes there?
Well, if you're in town, you know that this is a building, or maybe you don't know. The east
I know.
The east wall of the building is pretty much the east property line. The sidewalk face of the building is right on the sidewalk. The west face of the building is not the property line, but if you go across that hall or the yard to the west of the building, to the retaining wall that's supporting the sloped drive down to the Safeway lot, that's the property line. And that yard, as it appears today, will be filled in with the addition. And then the north face of the building is almost, but not quite on the property line. So there really is no property that can provide parking off street. The property will be completely filled with the building.
Okay.
So,
all right.
If you're going to go to an event in the evening, chances are you're going to park up the street a bit. You're going to stop at a restaurant. You're going to have a meal, maybe get a drink. All of that's kind of, although it sounds like it's bad for the city that there's no off-street parking, it's really good because people are going to park downtown. They're going to walk past shops, past restaurants, hopefully spend some money there. Studies have shown that historic theaters have almost a 3-to-1 multiplier for local economic development. In other words, for every dollar that's spent renovating a theater, over time, $3 are returned to the city in turn because people do just that. They frequent bars, restaurants, shops. They stay at hotels. They fuel up their cars.
Absolutely. So fair enough. I think that does answer that question. Someone did ask if there was going to be any maybe trolley service or anything put in place to move people from further away to closer to the theater, and that could impact anyone. Is there any plans for anything like that? And once again, I'm doing the questions from our Facebook feed or from email. And so they were just wondering if there's any plans for moving the people to the theater and away from it, maybe.
There's no plans that I know of. That's a great vision. I think Sky Tallman, who's the city's really creative planner. He may have some vision for that. If that's something that's of interest to the community, you should advocate for that, but that's outside the purview of the Fox West Theater renovation.
Yes. And there was a question about where will the marquee go? And I believe we had talked about that's going to be a part of sort of the permanent collection in the Museum of Fox West memorabilia. So that'll be great to have that there. And one other question is the ballroom and the auditorium, will those be available for rent by concert promoters or theater groups or things like that? Do you have any information on that?
Yeah, we do. And what's really exciting about this renovation plan is that it will provide a number of venues within the same building. So let's just go through them. We'll have the 2 retail bays that will have activity. In the lower level, below each one of those retail bays are 2 rooms that have not been used for many decades that are going to be renovated into very nice meeting rooms. They'll have technology, flat screens. Those will be available for community groups and organizations and businesses and companies and families to rent. The ballroom will be renovated, all new lighting, technology. That will be a large meeting room, weddings, dances, quinceañeras, all kinds of things will be able to happen there. There's a video on the Fox West Theater website that shows the uncovering with Mr. Smith and I, removing material to show that there is a really interesting original, almost band shell in the bottom, in the front of that ballroom. That will be reused, that will be brought back. So that will help with musical performances. We'll have technology so that folks can bring microphones there, have large meetings. We'll have the theater, of course, will be open. And then in the addition, eventually, will be a pretty large theater lobby that can be used before events in the theater. When the theater is not open, that will be available for small trade shows, craft shows. So this theater, when it's fully renovated, will provide a lot of interesting opportunities to Trinidad.
Indeed, all of that sounds very exciting. I didn't really realize there was that many different spaces that could be utilized there. And so it's awesome to hear that that's the plan, to sort of maximize all of that. We did have a question online. What would you say, in your professional opinion, is the chance of a wedding reception happening on the stage? Because I think somebody's got some big plans in the works, so they're trying to make those early. So that was a question online that I am lobbing up to you.
Well, that would be great. It would be great to have a wedding on stage. That will not happen immediately. That won't happen this summer. And here's the reason. Thank goodness we have a fire chief in the city of Trinidad who cares about personal safety. Earlier, I talked about all of the phases of the project. Right now, we're bringing in the water lines for the sprinkler system and the pumps that will carry that water throughout the building. But the sprinklers themselves the sprinkler lines themselves for the theater auditorium will not be installed until phase 3. And so the fire chief will not give us what is called a certificate of occupancy, a certification that says, yes, the building is safe, the general public can come in here and use it in the ways that it's intended to be used, until the project is fully completed.
Fair enough. So we are a ways off.
At that time, its use is only limited by people's imagination.
I like it. I think that sounds really great. So the first phase will be those retail shops, and we'll be getting businesses in there by this summer, and then moving through the subsequent phases. Excellent. We did have another question here. Did the Rapp brothers, who are the original architects, I believe, did they ever build anything else like the Fox West? Is there any other sort of beautiful examples of their work around?
Well, we don't have any evidence that they did a theater like the Fox West. We know that they did other small theaters in the area. Their office, they had one in New Mexico and Trinidad. They have two brothers that practiced architecture in Chicago, and they became some of the best known theater architects in the country. But we have developed some research that informs us or allows us to strongly believe and say publicly in a format like this that this theater was in fact the very first Rapp Brothers theater.
Wow. And it is
Trinidad,
so beautiful.
Trinidad, if you go up the street in Trinidad, the bank building, the large stone bank building, has an entry arch that's really reminiscent of what will be the restored arch entryway to the theater. And I think you'll see that on the next slide if you want to go to that one. The next one. Yeah, there in the upper left-hand corner. So if you take that archway, if you're walking, for those of you in Trinidad, take a look at the arch in that bank building and compare it to this one. The Rapp brothers, they practiced classic revival architecture. That means Renaissance revival, Romanesque revival, not so much Gothic revival, but they practiced in period styles, and they emulated the best of classical architecture. And their work, they were so prolific, they have so many buildings in Trinidad. Really, that's why Trinidad is so beautiful. It's the inspiration of this classic architecture, and we still enjoy it today.
Indeed. Can you name any of those other buildings that the Rapp brothers have done here in Trinidad? So if anyone is watching and wants to go see some of their other work, is there anything you'd recommend here?
Chris would be a better source to tell you the names of those buildings.
Oh, fair enough. I like your commitment to the Fox West Theater. It is, and I know that they did like the E Street School here in town, and that's such a beautiful building. Chris, are there any other examples?
There are, and I'm so glad Gregory mentioned the First National Bank, which preceded the Fox West by a few years, but the stone archway entry is probably very similar to what's actually at the Fox West Theater. The Rapps also designed the small Episcopal church on South Animas Street. It's the only wood frame church the Rapps ever built. And you're right, they did the East Street School here in Trinidad too, along with a few others that I don't have the list on top of my head, but definitely this town is loaded with historic architecture.
And I thought that I might have heard that they had done the theater in Raton.
Yes.
They did the Schuler in Raton.
The Schuler in Raton.
Raton, New Mexico, 20 miles south of here, right on the other side of the pass, built the Schuler Theater shortly after the Fox West. Trinidad got the Fox West, and there was a little bit of jealousy, and Raton wanted their theater too, so they commissioned the same architects. If you're really, really keen on it, you'll see some similarities between the Schuler in Raton and the Fox West Theater here in Trinidad.
Well, one of the things I was told is they both have the most amazing acoustics.
That's right.
That both of those theaters are designed to be heard. And I've heard people. I've sat in the third balcony of the Fox West, and I've heard people whispering on the stage. It's the most amazing thing when a theater is well designed, and I cannot wait for that to be restored.
Right. Because that acoustic environment was something that around 1900, at the time of the Wright brothers, they didn't have microphones. They didn't plan on any of that for traveling vaudeville shows. They had to build something that would amplify voices out of the building itself. The Fox West Theater is one of the best acoustic environments absolutely in this country. And the Schuler rivals it. The Schuler has a lot more paint and a lot more ornamentation and carpet that deadens that sound pretty quickly.
Oh yeah, it did have a lot of carpet.
With the Fox West Theater, we got our original wood floors ready to be sanded and polished. Right?
I cannot wait. I cannot wait for this to happen, but I will wait for there. Well, Gregory, Mr. Friesen, is there anything else that you would like to add? I think that's most of the questions from our audience. Is there anything else that you want to say while you have us?
Well, just stay tuned. This is an exciting project, and when it's finished, it's going to transform the night and weekend life of Trinidad. We think it's going to bring all kinds of opportunities, concerts, lectures, musical performances, conferences, all the things we just talked about, weddings. It's going to make its mark on downtown Trinidad.
That's so great. I'm so excited, and thank you for your time tonight to be a part of this. I can't wait to see what the next 10 years or so of Trinidad's going to be. We're going to be the coolest city this side of Raton Pass. So thank you so much, Gregory.
Sure.
Excellent. Goodbye. All right. As we continue on with tonight's sort of community forum, we're going to take a look. We have a best of the Fox West Theater. Over the last couple of years during COVID, while we were kind of gearing up for this, quite a few musicians came through and performed in and around the Fox West Theater for a series of videos that you can see on the Fox West Theater's YouTube page. But we have taken some of the best performances from the last few years there and made this little show. So why don't you check this out? And don't forget that at 6 p.m. we are going to be having a presentation from Wendy Waszut-Barrett, and that's going to be so great about some of the artifacts and theater memorabilia that exists there at the Fox West Theater. So we're going to go to these performances, and we will see you again back here at 6.
West Theater in Trinidad appears to be taking on new life. The more than a century-old theater is undergoing renovations, making it once again a vibrant piece of Trinidad's art culture. Our John McMichael has more.
This thing is grand, it's old, it's interesting. What is this place to you?
This place to me is one of America's undiscovered gems of architecture and history.
Built in 1908, a stage theater through the 1920s, a movie theater until 2012, this classic, sitting abandoned, is now getting new life on the stage.
This building can support arts performances of all types.
Whether it's live performances or stand-up comedy, whatever may come.
The Fox West Theater Alliance, a nonprofit dedicated to restoring this building to its former glory, was approached by the Colorado Symphony early 2020, asking to host a performance on the stage. However, the pandemic made that prospect impossible.
What we did decide to do was allocate all the resources we could towards the production of a virtual season. That came to include over 24 performances from people across the country, from Denver, and from the local region.
Go easy there, cousin. There's a storm coming.
So it definitely felt really surreal to be shooting in a theater that it's been almost 100 years since there were performers.
Months of virtual performances and virtual tours for an audience unable to join in person.
We've shared it with everybody at home who's stuck at home and couldn't actually come and see the performances, and we've had a lot of really good feedback from the community that they're happy to see the Fox in action.
My people always been united brethren.
Going forward,
This place used to be the cultural hub of this entire region.
the nonprofit has received funds to stabilize the exterior and produce a plan for redevelopment.
And so to bring it back to that status is really, I think, the goal.
The hope here to raise funds to put that plan into action by this time next year.
It feels really awesome to be able to take a building that's been closed but means so much to a community, bring life back into it, and emanate it back out into the community.
With more virtual performances planned for Memorial Day, a theater museum on the way for spring, and the digitization of nearly a century of history,
Just another way to share the history of this place with other people.
the Fox West is planting its roots not only in the past, but the future of this area as well.
The dream of this building is for it again to serve Los Animas County and southeastern Colorado.
Watching out for you, Colorado, John McMichael, News 5.
And from planning, renovation, to opening a museum, to again digitizing for social media consumption, a wide array of artifacts, and someday hosting office space, there's a lot going on here. And come Memorial Day, there should be another performance paired with a telethon, one more way to help this project along.
Hello, my name is Justin Bank, and this is Michelle Castillo. We are both singer-songwriters from Denver, Colorado, and just wanted to say thank you very much. We are very pleased to be here supporting the Fox Theater in Trinidad, Colorado. Going to do a couple numbers. The first will be a song that Michelle wrote.
out of town today, headed south to the native land. Gonna find that old Mystique again, crossing over Rio Grande. Oh, mi amor, deseando para ti. Ahí se mi corazón, ole, ole, ole. Oye, mi amor, deseando para ti. Ahí se mi corazón, ole, ole, ole. Caught the railway out of town today, headed south to the native land. Gonna find that old Mystique again, crossing over Rio Grande. Oh, yeah, mi amor, deseando para ti. Ahí se mi corazón, ole, 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 ole.
Groundbreaking on the theater began in February 1907, and it opened only a little over a year later on March 16, 1908. Originally a theater and event space, a camera phone was installed in 1920 to show early films. And later, in 1929, the theater underwent an extensive remodeling, including equipping the theater to show sound motion pictures. West Theater was renamed the Fox West Theater at this time. By the 1930s, the Fox West Theater was the community center of Trinidad. Hosting cash giveaway nights made the theater wildly popular, even in the Depression era. In 1942, the Fox West became known as the Fox. At this time, a large renovation was planned, but the only part that came to fruition was installing a new concession stand, which is still in the theater today. In February 1959, John, Salma, and Marie Sawaya purchased the theater. The next largest renovations in the theater's history occurred around this time. They repainted it in its current color scheme and made several other improvements throughout. They installed a widescreen cinemascope system, including upgraded sound equipment, a fixed movie screen, and new projector, all cutting-edge technology for its time. The Sawaya family successfully operated the Fox as a movie theater for over 60 years until its eventual closure in 2013. In December 2018, the city of Trinidad, with funding from History Colorado and History Colorado State Historical Fund, supported the purchase of the building and its contents. Working in partnership with Urban Neighborhoods Incorporated and the Fox West Theater Alliance, the city of Trinidad is now working to restore this historic building.
You said you'd love me as long as you live. You said you'd need me day you drop dead. But the walls of the house that we both live in, they might suggest a different story to tell. They say it's cold, cold as the Rockies since you two moved in. And at best is warm, warm as the winters in East Arkansas. And all we could offer on this foundation, might we implore you to call another place home? And you said you'd need me. You need me every day. But when I offered my love, you turned away. How long could any man or woman live like a captive? When I brought you here, you were still near. Now you're none but far. And they say it's cold as the Rockies since you two moved in. And at best as warm as the winters in East Arkansas. All we could offer on this foundation, might we implore you to call another place home? Might we implore you to call another place home?
Wild iris in the aspen grove, Indian paintbrush They'll guide the way to the bristlecone. That's where I'm home. Wild iris beside the Cinquefoil. Columbine and blue lumpine, they'll guide the way to the evergreen. That's where I'll be. Over the mountain of silver hills, I'll be here under the stars. They'll guide the way, they know our love is real. Among these high alpine flowers, I love you, baby. Over the mountain of silver hills, I'll be here under the stars. They'll guide the way, they know our love is real. Among these high alpine flowers, I'll be here waiting for you.
Major renovation project underway on a cultural landmark in Trinidad. A nonprofit group working to bring the Fox West Theater back to its former glory. As our Andy Cohen reports from Trinidad tonight, the project received a major boost today from a very special guest.
The city of Trinidad welcomed Governor Jared Polis to town this afternoon, and he had some good news to share.
The state is making an investment through Colorado Creative Industries of $3.45 million to get this done.
The historic Fox West Theater is in the middle of a multi-year, multi-million-dollar renovation.
The dream and vision can be described as bringing it back to what it was built to be. A center for community and the arts.
The theater first opened in 1908 and hosted vaudeville acts and traveling performances from around the country. It was converted to a cinema during the Great Depression and remained that way all the way up through the 2010s.
When that screen was installed, it created a time capsule. And this wonderful historic stage equipment, stage machinery was just forgotten, but it was preserved.
After sitting dormant for a number of years, the city purchased the property. A partnership of nonprofit groups and state and local governments have been pooling money since to help bring the building into the 21st century.
The news from the governor means we are going to reactivate the storefronts.
These rooms at the front of the building originally housed a saloon and a pharmacy, and they will be the first spaces to reopen.
We will be restoring the facade of the storefronts so that what is now, boarded up plywood will be this beautiful entrance to this theater.
More money needs to be raised and more work needs to be done, but the team behind this transformation is confident they'll have the stage shining again in just a few short years. In Trinidad, Andy Cohen, News 5.
evening is nigh, they'll hurry to my blue heaven. I turn to the right, a little bright light will lead you to my blue heaven. You see a smiling face, a fireplace, a cozy room, and a little nest that's nestled where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, and the baby makes three. We're happy in my blue heaven. A fireplace, a cozy room, and a little nest that's nestled where the roses bloom. Just Molly and me, and the baby makes three. We're happy in my blue heaven. We're happy in my
under the modern eyes of the Mexican sky. She was happy you had chosen her son, and it was fate laid us down. Sacred heart, sacred ground, her two children, and we moved as one. And you said you love me. You said you love me. Now there's something missing when you're kissing me. It's subtle, yet it's gone. And then I'm suspicious, and then it gets vicious, and then it's all right through your heart. And you said you love me. I thought you loved me. Now there lies an ocean of time between your life and mine. You look happy and you're married at that, and oh, said you loved me. I thought you loved
Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed those performances. It was awesome that those people got to come down and be a part of the Fox West Theater's summer concert series, I think was what some of those were from. And it was such a cool thing that we did. If you're just joining us right now, we're in the last segment of our Fox West Theater Community Forum that has been running. Earlier, we were lucky enough to hear from the lead architect, Gregory Friesen. And now I'm hoping that Wendy Barrett, are you there?
I sure am. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you so much for being here tonight. I do want to let our viewers know that you're of Historic Stage Services, doing a lecture tonight as a part of Trinidad State College's Visiting Artist Lecture Series. And that is made possible through a grant from the Environmental Protection Agency. Dr. Barrett, thank you so much for being here.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me. I'm always thrilled to be able to talk about historic theater and scenic art, and especially the Fox West.
I hear that. I'm so excited. Why don't you just take it away? I'm excited to hear what you have to say tonight.
I need to share my screen.
That sounds about right. I think so. And our technical person's giving me the thumbs up, so we should be good there.
Well, that sounds wonderful. So what I'm going to start with is to let you know I'm doing closed captioning. So those of you who are hard of hearing or need a little visual assistance, you can have that. First of all, I'm going to take about 5-6 minutes to tell you a little about myself and what perspective I view the Fox West Theater with. For the past 30 years, I've been working in a series of different capacities. I work as a historical consultant, a scenery restoration specialist. That means I instruct others and talk to people about how to handle and safely store and use scenery. I'm a contemporary scenic designer. I have 2 operas that open this June. I am a scenic artist, historically trained in traditional methods that were used in the late 19th century and early 20th century. I'm also a fine art instructor working in all different kinds of media, including acrylics and oils and pastels and inks and graphite. And I am a published author. I'm professionally affiliated with a variety of academic and theater institutions and organizations throughout the world. And to give you kind of an insight into some of my current projects, I'm working as historical consultant at Schouwburg-Kortrijk, which is the municipal theater in Kortrijk, Belgium. They have 5 of their sets that they've identified as national treasures. So for the past few years, I've been working with them, and I visited this summer about appropriate handling and storage techniques as they decide to move forward with their scenery collection. On the North American side, one of my many projects was relocating a very large theater collection from Richmond, Virginia last year to Phoenix, Arizona, from the Richmond, Virginia Scottish Rite Theater to the Tucson, Arizona, sorry, not Phoenix, and just a sneak peek into the lowering and the re-rolling and the carefully transporting across country. In addition to doing historical consultation and handling of historic collections, I also have historically inspired designs for theaters that no longer have their scenery. And this is the Sanderson Center for the Arts in Brantford, Ontario, where I redesigned a grand border that's 60 feet by 12 feet high, as you can see in the picture, and side tormentors. And the idea was to be able to take a very large space and compress it for more intimate performances. But while I do these projects, I also make sure that I capture the actual process, which is a traditional process and can be used as a teaching tool. So for all the patterns that you just saw, these were the pounces and the early color workup. And then I also do restoration. Last September, I restored the grand curtain, the front curtain, at the Brown Grand Opera House in Concordia, Kansas, and the border on top, which is the grand border. Starting in 2002 to 2005, I restored the entire scenery collection at the Santa Fe Scottish Rite, just south of you. This is one of those sample scenes. So I've been working in the region for quite some time. The Southwest is pretty much my favorite. And all of the drops that I restored for the Santa Fe Scottish Rite ended up being a book that I not only authored, but I also was the volume editor for it. So I worked with Dr. Rick Hendricks, who is the state historian. He was a contributing author, Kristen Vilela, who is the director for the International Folk Art Museum. And we actually won an award for it from the New Mexico Historical Society. So I come at my art form not only as a scholar and a writer, but also as a practitioner and a scenic artist. And part of what has made me tick, and part of why I'm so excited to work with the Fox West Theater and to explore their scenery collections, is I started in 1989 understanding scenic illusion for the stage. And from that point, I've always tried to share my research immediately, and the internet has made that as a forum. So I have both a blog, which is drypigment.net, and then I have a Facebook group which provides larger photo files for my colleagues, especially international colleagues, to use as instructional tools for teaching. But the drypigment.net was intended to help out smaller theaters that didn't have the resources and had no idea where they fit within the scope of not only American theater history, but within popular entertainment and American history in general. So this works as a database where you could type in like Fox West or Trinidad, and lo and behold, everything that I've written about it will come to light. And this sharing of knowledge started in 1989 when I cataloged a series of historical theater collections. And the first was the Great Western Stage Equipment Company out of Kansas City. Then I did the Hollett collection a couple years later, all as an undergrad. And this was woven into my doctorate. But the point was, it was taking this heritage and making sure it was accessible. So in 1999, 2000, I helped create an online database platform that helped make people access historic design. So if you wanted to see a sample of what would you have seen when you walked into the Fox West, you'd be able to go into the website and pull up one of the 3,000 designs. And much while I was doing the archival work, I would take small paintings and enlarge them, studying historic method. But at the same time, I was also creating an index for a scenic artist who worked from 1873 to 1934, the name of Thomas Moses. And how this plays into the Fox West is Moses was the first employee of Sossman and Landis, and he was also the final president of the firm. And this small company where Joseph Sossman and Perry Landis met in Iowa, and they traveled and basically did scenery. They finally had a brick and mortar business by 1879 in Chicago. And they grew so large that by 74, they had delivered scenery, or by 1881, they had delivered scenery to 74 theaters over the course of the year. By 1894, that number had ticked up to 4,000 total theaters that they had delivered. And by 1902, it was 6,000 theaters in the United States, Mexico, Canada, Jamaicans, and South Africa. And this was their theater work. They were also designing for Al Ringling Grand Circus Spectacles and Frederick Thompson on Luna Park, Coney Island, and you name it. So many companies got their start at Sossman and Landis, including the Kansas City Scenic Company. So this might be an 1894 catalog page talking about some of the options for your theater. But the Kansas City Scenic Company, which delivered the Fox West Theater, was one of their offshoots, which meant a former employee established an affiliate branch and would also run regional offices. And that's what Kansas City Scenic was. So Saussman and Landis and the Kansas City Scenic Company of Kansas City, Missouri, took the West by storm. And there was just no competition. And fortunately, the Fox West still has some of these pieces. So the Kansas City Scenic Company also delivered to the Tabor Opera House in Leadville, which means that there's a connection between the Fox West. This is one of many connections I found, by the way, between that and Leadville, and the Wheeler Opera House. It also connects the Fox West from your Kansas City Scenic Company to Karen Manis's book, The Art of the Hollywood Backdrop, and some of the drops that made their way to Hollywood and J.C. Backing. And now another Kansas City scenic drop is at the University of Texas with Karen Manis as an instructional tool. So it's how you can have the Fox West Theater and see all of the connections throughout the country. So providing historical context for the Fox West, this is what you see when you go in, and a lot of the screenshots that you can capture. You're seeing an oleo curtain, and this would have been a drop that would have been brought down in between scenes of a melodrama. So just imagine if there was a show, sometime there's a musical interlude in between the scenes of an act. Or with vaudeville, you'd have a series of acts, and this would be brought down mid-stage so that a scene change could occur behind it while a musical act was going on in front of it. And sometimes they were classical or Eastern in nature or some kind of exotic theme. And it was painted for a distance. And everything that you see in the theater that were grand circus spectacles, that were at World Fair amusements or on Coney Island, it was captured by painting for a distance, which means you can't have a large photograph. If there's too much detail, it actually is blurrier to the eye and it gets a little fuzzy. There's a separation that's intended as you go closer. And so what we'll do is we'll zoom in. Here's a picture that I took this summer. So as we get closer to the oleo drop, you can see how the painting starts to fall apart. And that's very intentional. You don't want extremely fine details because the fine details get lost from a distance. And as you can see extremely close up, how you're able to see the individual brushstrokes and color palette. And what you were looking at is basically a combination of two ingredients that are no longer used for when creating scenery for the stage, other than in fine art stores for small artists to use. It's dry color. What scenic artists were using when they delivered and painted scenery for the stage was a combination of dry color and diluted animal hide glue. So this shows you two different yellows, a warm and a cool, and I'll be talking about that later. The same paint that was used throughout the 19th century and into the 20th century, up until, in some cases, the 1950s and later, but it's no longer used. And scenic art, so you have these two things. You have color and you have glue. And what they're intended to do is create a metamorphosis on stage. It might be a large scale artwork by a nationally recognized artist, but it was still never intended to hang on a wall under static lighting. There was intended to be movement and color shifts. And so the translucent sections, which you can see where it says front, that's the view that you'd have with the sky absolutely glowing. And then from the back, when you were standing behind the drop, you could see how very thinly painted that fabric was. Scenic art in the 19th century and in the 20th century, and all the scenery that was delivered to the Fox West in Trinidad, was a strategic combination of dry pigment, so that's that pure color, and hide glue, which is a diluted hide hoof glue that provides this perfectly flat finish. And it's important that it has to be absolutely flat, no satin, no eggshell, because that would reflect the stage lights and basically blur the scenic illusion. And so you'd get this color. This is how you created a backdrop for the Fox West. Color would come into a studio. And if it arrived in a block form, not a powder form, it was ground up into a powder. as you see on the screen. And then this powder was turned into a pulp, like a paste. And this wet paint was what was put on a scenic artist palette. And you'd have all these different colors. And when you created scenic art, in some ways you were painting blind because the dry color is so different from the wet color. And if you'd add in whiting, that could mean it goes 25 shades lighter, where it looks like dark green, but by the time it dries, it's actually a pale green. And then the binder that I keep talking about is, it almost looks like raw sugar, like a chunky raw sugar. And you'd heat it up, you'd introduce water so that it would blossom, and then you heat it up and it becomes this maple syrup molasses consistency. And that's what furniture restorers still use today. If you're using that traditional glue, that's what you use. But for scenic art, you not only used varying strengths. So if it was fairly strong, that might seal the fabric and prepare it for the drawing, the cartooning of the composition. But then you'd further dilute it with water and it would become size water. And that was your working size that you would mix on your palette with your actual color. And so there was no perfect formula. There still isn't. You basically, with the glue, when it gets ready, you dip your fingers in the glue, you shake it off, you blow on your fingers, and you start doing this. And when it pops, you know it's the right consistency. So you've factored in all the different humidity changes and environmental concerns. So when you have your color mixed and you'd have your glue mixed and everything getting ready to paint the scenery for the Fox West Theater, you would have an option of painting it up or painting it down. Now, painting it up on a frame was really common and comes from the English tradition and the United Kingdom. And that really took hold for the 19th century and early 20th century in America. We primarily painted up. The Central European tradition was more of a painting down. It was called the Continental method. And here are two examples of men and women painting in 1902 on a frame where you were painting up, and then in 1927 with the more contemporary frame or floor painting, which is pretty much used down. Okay, so you have your color, you have your glue, and you're going to put it on a palette. So what you do is in 1893, 1903, 1923, you basically have this huge palette. So this is to show over the course of time how it continued to go. And if you were in a very large studio and didn't have access to a theater paintbridge, such as the Fox West has, you would have a standalone building with all of these paint frames. And these are the paint frames that were at the Twin Cities Scenic Company in Minneapolis. You can see the area where it says scenery and stage supplies. That was like the fly house, where you'd be able to have the frames. Here's another example from 1910 in Chicago, and the company that I was talking about, Sossman and Landis, which was kind of the mother company for Kansas City Scenic. This was what was used for over 2 decades as the epitome of the best shop you could possibly have. And that shop wasn't large enough that also pick up annex studios and would still have to paint on site because there was so much work coming in. If you had your palette, this was a drawing by John Hanning. He worked at Sossman and Landis in 1906 and continued his career until the 1980s, when he left a lot of this information in a series of letters sent to Dr. Rothgeb at the University of Texas. And so if we put those colors, this was the scenic art palette that was standard use at Sossman and Landis. It didn't mean that this was the only palette they had, but it was their standard palette. And that's also what was used at the studios that came after them, such as Kansas City Scenic. This is another actual paint palette. This is Jesse Cox's paint table. It's at the Theater Museum of Repertoire Americana in Mount Pleasant, Iowa, to give you another visual of what these artists had on the paint frame when they were painting the scenery. And just like special colors and special glues and special paint palettes, they also had special paint tools. So paint bridges. This is a great example from 1878. of what was still happening in America in 1910. You have a paint bridge, and you can see all of the scenic artists on the paint bridge making their scenery. What you want to pay attention to is the arrow that points to the action down on the stage. It's the arrow that points to the pin rail. It's the back of the scenery on the stage. So it's the idea of they weren't just coming in during the day when rehearsals were occurring down below, they were also working at night. So this paint bridge, and this is what will take us into the Fox West Theater, is what you can see on the paint bridge as I saw it in July of this past summer. So that's where a drop would be hanging that they would raise and lower, because the idea was, even though a theater would open with a whole bunch of new scenery, scenery would continue to be added. The community expected not just to see the same old stuff forever, it would constantly be added to, and there would be new pieces that were added for touring shows if they didn't have a full set of stock scenery. So you'd paint on that side, and you'd also paint on toward the audience side, that's the downstage side. And this is another view of the Fox West Theater paint bridge from July that shows some of the historic scenery that was stored on the rail. And another view that you can see, there's an abundance of historic scenery that didn't get thrown away. It just kind of got tucked up high out of sight. And from a contamination standpoint, much of it was covered with pigeon droppings, and to a detail of the fact that the scenery has survived not only not being thrown out, not only a theater fire that typically happens, that it was somehow preserved, and it can still be preserved beyond this point. And then a little independent of the scenery, which is what we're talking about. But when I was up on the paint bridge and photographing and documenting, because I wanted to know, approximately how many pieces there were, and as much information as I could, because before I ever step foot or even visit a historic theater, I always try to get as much information as possible so I know what I'm looking for. On that back wall, it says, "Leave hope, all ye who enter here," all who enter here. And here's a detail of it. This is part of the heritage of the Fox West, just as much as the scenery and the stage machinery and what Christopher Smith is finding throughout the building. I mean, there's bulb dip, there's so much stuff there, but it's the quotes, and you have to wonder who wrote this. I mean, obviously it was paraphrasing Dante's Inferno, but there are also these wonderful markers of time that you can find throughout the fly galleries by the stagehands who were out there. So that was our little side trip. Now, scenic art in general is, I talked about the metamorphic nature. It's painting for light. And I want to talk you through this because you'll always look at what that oleo curtain is at the Fox West a little bit differently. Light reflects color. So if you would take like a blue light on blue color, it's going to really enhance that blue. With scenic art, what they wanted to do was have a little bit of each color. So a warm color and a cool color, not just the warm and cool yellow that I spoke of, but also the actual color. So one of the more popular color mixtures was orange and blue, specifically ultramarine blue and French mineral orange. When you mix these two together, you get this beautiful lavender that was pretty much used for shadows. And what that allows you to do is, under the standard stage lighting that was being delivered, and this is different from contemporary lighting theory. So scenic studios were primarily looking at red, blue, and clear light. Modern theory today is red, blue, green, but this is what was being delivered. And it kind of made it idiot-proof in a way. Because green light can really make it not look real, romantic realism on stage. So the idea is that there's a little bit of each color in that will allow it to go from a bright sunny day scene to an evening scene. So if you take the oleo drop at the Fox West and you bathe it in a blue light, it will look like it's this gorgeous, vibrant color in the evening, versus a sunshiny day. And it's the versatility and the metamorphosis on stage that we had. The same thing was happening in Europe. The Kortrijk Theater that I'm working with in Belgium, this is a 1921 Lachme set. This is one of the sets that I'm dealing with by Albert Dubosc. And so it's the idea of it's that same color. They were sharing the same palettes because there was a universal painting language for a visual aesthetic that was shared worldwide at that point. And this continues today. So I create dry pigment samples and I bring them over to Belgium for a colleague who is actually exploring light and how candlelight versus gaslight versus incandescent and LED, how they react. And so the idea of still working with historic scenery, but also looking at new technology to see how can you replicate that feel? And this is a worldwide endeavor with international colleagues because there are so many historic theaters that do have historic scenery still, and how to properly light it. You can't always use contemporary lighting theory, but also you want to be true to how it was intended because studios and artists were creating these paintings for a very specific type of light. And scenery was extremely popular. So let's say Ed West is looking for his new scenery, and he is going to encounter a salesman who's going to come with a little maquette, a little scale model of a theater. And if you went to visit the scenic studio, the Kansas City Scenic Studio, you would see a little model with all of these drawers of designs. Now, these are front drop curtains, also called drop curtains. And that type of design is what would have been at the Fox West. So when I circle back to this toward the end, just keep these two in mind. Now, they were meant to travel. So here's two trunks produced in 1931 by Thomas Moses that I study. And this is at the University of Texas, Austin, Harry Ransom Center. And on the left side, you can see that's the little theater that would have been lifted out. And on the right side, those are all hanging designs. So this is fraternal in nature, but this same system was being peddled from one theater to the next. So this is what was brought to the Tabor Opera House in Leadville, Colorado. This is what would have been brought to the Broadway Theater in Denver, or the Tabor Grand Opera House in Denver, or the Fox West Theater. This is what was brought to the Santa Fe Scottish Rite Temple. It's the idea of they traveled and you had options. So when you had a front curtain like this, sometimes clients would request a very specific image. And so here you go. This is from the Twin Cities Scenic Company collection at the U of M Performing Arts Archives. That was the source that was used for the drop curtain that we just saw. And over time, you began to have sales books. So those beautiful originals in a little theater became a little book of, here's your color photo, this is the one you want to order. And then to walk you through what the options were in these models. So when someone would have come to the Fox West and said, hey, what kind of scenery do you want? We're going to custom make a stock scenery collection for you. So let's figure out what you want. We're going to start with a backdrop. Everyone wants a backdrop. So here's your backdrop. How about some side wings? Do you want a couple of side wings? That'll really help with the dimension. And if you have the side wings, you really got to have that border curtain because that'll help push it back. So if you were a very small stage, this is all you might have. But then you'd try to do just like some kind of carpet cleaner, you're going to want upscale in the Scotch garden. So now you'd go in and you'd be able to have a second set of wings and a second border, because that would help increase the visual depth on stage, and it would really convince your audience and pull them in, and you'd be able to attract more touring shows because you'd have better scenery. And then maybe you want some garden balustrades to go with that because, all those classical scenes, this is a possibility. So that's what was being marketed. And this scenery was so valuable that it was traded in like a used car. So you've had your scenery collection for, let's say, a dozen years or so. It's looking a little dilapidated. It's starting to show some wear and tear. The scenic studio, hopefully the same one, but it could be a different one, would go in and say, hey, I want new scenery, and then say, oh, that's great. If you want to return your scenery, we'll give you credit toward the purchase of new. So it was traded in, and you can see on the left how that center section is being just added, and then they're going to blend the two. And on the right, you can see where this whole center section was expanded with fabric and just glued together. So that's the area. Now, signs of deterioration, because nothing lasts forever. And there are things that can accelerate drops just crumbling apart, but they're pretty hardy. So let's look at what happens. Over time, the binder will start to break down. So you'll have dusting pigment or flaking pigment, that being color that's coming off of it. And along with the color, you're going to have dirt. Bat guano, pigeon droppings, flash powder, mortar dust, cigarette smoke, cigar smoke, soot from coal, that's all going to coat it. And so when you're moving it, and even dry pigment drops from 1984, and I have the 1902 on the right, they're still going to flake because there are so many things that can cause it. One is it could have just been a poor tradesman in the beginning where the glue boy wasn't really paying attention that day and he mixed it too white. So it could have been flaking from initial delivery, but it also can flake when you have high humidity or liquid that comes in contact with it. So these surface contaminants, when they're dirty, even if there's dusting pigment, they can still be removed, but there's still going to be, let's say everything's cleaned up. This is a workshop that I held in Duluth, Minnesota, of a 1904 Sauceman and Landis backdrop, where we cleaned half of the drop with archival sponges to show, I know we've vacuumed it with low suction dust extraction, but there's still embedded particles that need to come off, or you'll never see exactly what the audience saw or the artist intended. Other signs of deterioration are a concentration of dirt and pigment, a tide line that happens when water comes in contact with the paint. So unlike regular latex paint today, if you throw water on it, there might be some water damage, but not a lot. With dry pigment painting, the way that the drops at the Fox West are painted, what happens is any type of liquid, it could be spit, beer, water, rain, snow melt, it doesn't matter. It will reactivate the paint. And if there's enough of it, it will completely and instantaneously remove the paint from the surface. So there's short-term water damage and also long-term water damage. And this shows at the bottom, there used to be sandwich battens that would hold the fabric taut and weigh it down. When you pry those boards apart, you can identify whether there's long-term water damage, short-term loss of fabric, mold, or hardware rust. And so what we see on that oleo drop that so many people performed in front of tonight when we were relooking at past performances is you see where liquid has come in contact with the oleo drop. And in some cases, it has removed. Now, the white that you're seeing here is going down to the white primer because you can see some of it next to it too. Or it's the white left over from pigeon droppings too. And because of the liquid, it also worked as just like water damage would. So from far away, we don't really see it, but that's some of the immediate danger that the painted scenery is in. So when the scenery was delivered, what do we know from historic papers? Well, there fortunately, and this is really lucky, there's one picture from the proscenium, and this was pointed out to me by Gregory Friesen and Chris Smith in last July because it was when we did our tour, it was on one of the enlarged Xerox copies of newspaper articles. I want to show you what we're actually seeing because it's so hard to decipher. First of all, that's a painted grand border. And that was intended to be there. it meant that it could be removed. It wasn't permanently fixed. If you had an acrobatic troupe that was coming in, or you really needed to have that full proscenium arch for some kind of an event, that could be moved up, lowered, or taken away. While it was there, what it allowed you to do was reformat the actual stage. So you still have the flexibility of having, you know, approximately a 36 by 35 stage, but this would change the visual realism. This looks like it is a roll drop. I'm still sitting on the fence about this one because it could also have been what was delivered to the Tabor Opera House in Leadville, a secondary grand border that's very similar to that. So how do I look at this? How do we, you know, do a little bit of forensic exploration on this photograph? You look at, okay, so there's a line and there's where a highlight's going, and you can see how it kind of connects to the edge of the proscenium. So you have a light source that's coming from there, and it suggests that you have this line. So it is a drop, not a roll drop, it's a fly drop that has a bottom wooden batten at the bottom to hold it down. Now, if you were to, let's say, imagine what the audience would have seen as they came in, it would be beautifully painted draperies that are so realistic you can't tell there's not satin or plush fabric and all of this amazing detail and possibly little dangling coins from beautiful stuff. And this beautiful coloration that would have taken all of the architectural detail and ornamental painting that was throughout the Fox West Auditorium and suck it into the center. Because when the patrons walked into the space to see a show, to see some of those early movies, not when they renovated this for a cinema, but the early movies were also created with painted surrounds. And they would sit and they would look at what was on stage and how this was all drawn together beautifully. And then to give you more of just, if you want to take away the pink, how they all tied together. So what do we know about what's still at the Fox West? What's been in basically cold storage for a very long time? This is the site that greeted me in July. And what I'm able to determine is that blue that I was digging around with last summer was actually a border curtain. I don't have a picture of what that border curtain looks like, but this is one from the Kansas City Scenic Company for Deadwood, South Dakota. What border curtains were is you would, when I was showing you the picture of the garden with the woods and the little border curtain across the top, that served a purpose beyond just helping it have a dimension. The purpose it served was to conceal lighting instruments and stage machinery that was above the stage. So for another example, also in Deadwood, South Dakota, sometimes they would be very fancy painted curtains like grand borders. Sometimes they would be foliage. Sometimes they would be interiors. And to date, what we do know is there's the oleo curtain that I showed you, 4 border curtains, 2 skies and 2 interiors, a backing drop for the interior setting, very abstract. There's still suspended a fabric plush curtain that has detail on it, and 1 to possibly 2 still remain unknown as far as I'm unsure of what's on site. But to take the Fox West and put it into a time capsule, there might only be 8 pieces, 9 pieces, 10 pieces left in Trinidad. But what we can do is we can look at the other theaters that also purchased scenery from the Kansas City Scenic Company that were delivered in 1908. I've tracked approximately 100 theaters that the Kansas City Scenic Company delivered scenery from between 1901 and about 1912. They're not all. They're the ones that over the course of about 20 years, I've been able to start flagging, because now I've been doing this since I was 19. So you got 33 years. And as I've been doing this, I tuck information aside that I can recall when I come across, okay, the Fox West was 1908. That means that this is the whole list of theaters that have comparable collections. And it also starts to show the artistic provenance of all of the scenery that's at the Fox West. Because if you start going down, these are several from Arkansas, Arizona, Colorado, Kansas, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas. I've identified those, but those aren't the only ones. How many of those are still around? And yesterday, just for the heck of it, I started to see, sometimes if you type in it, you can go to an immediate new website. I haven't been able to find any yet. And then of those, if the theater didn't burn down, wasn't raised to be a parking lot, wasn't somehow cut up to be little apartment units, what's the chance that they actually have any of that scenery? Which is why it's so very important that the Fox West handle these little scenic backdrops and border curtains with absolute treasure, because that's 1908 Kansas City Scenic. Where else is 1908 Kansas City Scenic? It's incredibly important. And to leave on a fun note, before I field questions here and wrap up, in 1907, 1908, the Kansas City Scenic Company also played amateur baseball. Almost all of the scenic studios did, but they were quite good. So if you look at the bottom, you see the Kansas City Scenic Companies will meet and practice tonight at the Scenic Company's ballpark. All players take notice. So I, for a lark, started to see how many games they were playing. And, were they playing a lot of games when they were painting the Fox West Theater? Were they playing that summer? What was going on? And basically, this is one from after the scenery was delivered, but Kansas City Scenics battling Vogel Heights and the Western Sash and Door Company. So you can see who they were playing. But to end with my pigments, how I like to present what the Fox West Theater has, the opportunity that is there right now, is it's not just about painting and it's not just about scenic art. It was a shared visual aesthetic that Trinidad shared with Leadville and Denver and Salt Lake City and Kansas City and Chicago and Al Ringling's Grand Circus Spectacles. This was a painted aesthetic that encompassed everyone's life, whether you were a rancher or a miner or a mill worker or some kind of merchant in a small town, regardless of who you were or where you were at in the United States, you would be able to share the same visual aesthetic. And this went on for decades. And the Fox West purchased their scenery just before that aesthetic changed, because after World War I, it never went back to this. This is the heyday of scenic art. My heyday is like 1880, well, actually 1890 to 1910. That's what I consider it. It starts as early as 1880, but it changes after the war. I mean, they lost journeyman painters. People change industries when they lost all of those men, and you look at the draft age. But up until that point, it was this shared moment. And you're able to connect the Fox West not just to other theaters within the scope of American theater history, but you're able to connect it to amateur baseball leagues and boxing events. And yes, of course, cinema after renovations and stuff happened, and vaudeville and variety shows. But you're able to look over time at how this all connects us together and how it gathered people for community events. And it places the Fox West not just within Los Animas County. So it's beyond that. It's regional. If you start to stretch to Santa Fe, you can stretch to Denver, you can stretch all the way over to Salt Lake City. But it also goes in a much larger picture where it is national, and it does connect internationally to other historic theaters. Because whenever a program or series like this happens, where you're able to look at historic theater finds, other ones come to light. And every single collection and how you handle these artifacts sets a precedent for every single other person that is going to encounter another historic artifact in a theater. So these aren't old backings, they aren't dirty paintings that are far beyond salvaging. They are literally national treasures that need to be preserved because their numbers are dwindling. So hope I didn't gab on too long. If you would like to have any questions, I will stop sharing my screen so you can see me.
I like it. Well, first of all, Dr. Barrett, I just want to say thank you. I've always, I love listening to passionate people talk about their passions. I don't even, I mean, I'm interested in this one, obviously, but I don't even care what the passion is. People that care and people that have love for these things, I could listen to you talk about dry pigments for a couple more hours. And I didn't know
well, good. That makes me feel
that
bad.
I would be saying that at the end of this. So just let me start by saying thank you for your care, for everything you've done to enlighten us on this today. We've only got a few questions from the internet, but I'd love to talk to you about them. They were wondering what kind of animal that hide is for the glue. And I get it, so they were wondering, is it cow or sheep or what's going on? What more you know about that?
Well, the easiest one is you heard about the old horses where they went.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
But
still a joke to this day. That makes sense. That makes sense.
But no, that being said, it's actually rabbit skin glue is probably the finest with most clarity. I use a combination of technical gelatin and hide glue when I paint with dry pigment because I like the clarity and there's a little bit of flexibility. It's basically cow, can be rabbit, can be horse. It's a combination and it depends on what you order. There's actually Bjorn Industries in North Carolina right now manufactures a whole variety of hide glues in different forms. So that answers it. My personal favorite is a high clarity mixture of hide glue and technical gelatin.
I like it. The other question they were wondering, are these backdrops coming by train to the locations? What's the time frame?
That's a really good question. So what would happen is it would be painted at the studio. So there's a whole legion of people, or maybe one very tired person who's sewing a whole bunch of backdrops together. And those fabric pieces, they would get hauled up to the studio level and tacked to frames, painted, then they'd be untacked, and sometimes other stuff would have to happen to it. If they had cut openings, they might need to be netted. And when they were all set and ready to go, they would be rolled and they would be shipped by half carload or full carload. So the scenic studio, usually in a metropolitan hub that was close to some kind of depot, they would transport them over by some kind of wagon or carriage or hand carried, and then load them into the box car, and then they would be shipped via freight. And there are tales of scenery being damaged or ill handling of scenery that caused the damage of it. I mean, the entertaining stories, new theater is going to open, where's the scenery? Oh my gosh, it got rerouted to a different city. And so that's what the rolled goods, and those are called soft. So your border curtains, your leg drops, your cut drops, your back drops, your front curtains, all of that would be rolled soft and shipped. But then there are those hard pieces like the little flats that I had. And those would be very specific that they would be under 5'9". So a lot of it hinged so that you would be able to get it through the doors on a train. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. Hopefully our internet viewers feel the same. I was going to ask, we have a historic opera house here, or would backdrops like these, would they have also been used, like would they have been even traded between places, or do they kind of get installed at the Fox West and stay there?
No, they could come from another place too. So occasionally, and so my special little niche is the theatrical interpretation of Freemasons who use scenery, and they have like little time capsules all throughout the country. If a theater closes in town and there's another theater, it often defaults to the remaining theater because the new owners don't want the scenery, especially if they're not going to use it as an actual performance hall. They're going to divvy it up into like apartments or raise it for a parking lot. So they can default. And I found a ton of used scenery. Deadwood, South Dakota, at the Masonic Hall there, they purchased in the 1920s. By then they had purchased 2 full sets, one from Joplin and one from Kansas City. And they didn't even have a fly tower. So they just kept these rolled up things in the basement above a dirt floor, and they survived, which was amazing. And then when they built their fly tower in 1961, a lot of the unused scenery, because they just didn't have enough to display 2 collections, is just sitting up there, rolled, waiting for someone to open it at some point. And this is the case with so many theaters. It might be tucked away above an auditorium. It could be tucked away above a paint bridge. It's there. They're just waiting to be discovered and be unrolled again and have someone gasp from the audience, because even though you have all this dirt, if you look at it from far enough away, that magic is still captured. And you think, what was the last person who saw this unrolled? That's the exciting part. That's the Indiana Jones part. Not the I'm going to shove it in a box and you're never going to see it again because it's special. It's the idea of, when was the last time someone actually saw that on stage? And what was the world like? So.
Yeah, it's like almost time travel or something. It's such an interesting thing. I had one question. You had mentioned that water and liquids are so bad for these dry pigments. When a theater like the Fox West gets renovated and they install fire suppression systems or things like that, what do you just kind of have to hope that they never get engaged, or is there anything that can be done to protect those dry pigments from those more modern water-based fire systems?
Well, and justifiably so. I mean, with how horrific fires were throughout the United States and the world,
yes,
you absolutely have to take care of it. But with historic scenery, there are 2 things to know. One is, if you put on contemporary flame-proofing products, it will just destroy it. It's like giving it cancer. The pigment will start to flake off. It reacts with the original fireproofing, because all of the scenery that was delivered to the Fox West, I can almost guarantee was flame-proofed before it went out of the shop, because theater companies, theater suppliers advertised safe scenery, fireproof scenery. Well, no scenery's fireproof, but there was a flame retardant that would not make it just go. So it's the idea of there's that. When they also had sprinkler systems, because that's not new. Sometimes there are big vats of water sitting above a theater that would, you'd pull that if there was a fire on the stage and it would just rush down. Or the smoke doors that would be above a theater. Those leaked all over the country. And there was only one theater that I went into where they took those smoke doors and they put them to the stage left side. It's the only scenery collection I've seen that didn't have any water damage whatsoever, because it was leaking over here versus in the middle. But if sprinkler systems would go on, it's all done. I mean, and there is no way to permanently fix those colors without changing them or adding a sheen to the surface. So yeah, that is just one of the things that you hope for. But again, it's more about human life than the artworks at that point, as you have to.
Yeah, indeed. So safety first, as far as our fire programs go at the Fox West.
Yeah.
And I think we're getting on towards the end. I had one more question I wanted to ask. Where in the country could someone go to see the best current example of the type of scenery that we have at the Fox West? Is there any place that jumps out in your mind?
You drive south to Santa Fe, go to the Scottish Rite Temple. It's a 1912 Sossman and Landis collection. And it is stunningly beautiful. And I'm sure you can get a tour because they are open for tours. But that whole collection is not only old, but I've restored every single piece. So,
oh my gosh.
So I was going to say, so it's going to be there for a while, I hope. And it really, it is just absolutely stunning. And it is close. So that's the one that's currently accessible right now to go to. And it's the Pink Palace based on the Alhambra. It's in the center of Santa Fe. It's just stunningly beautiful. I mean, and that's also connected to the Fox, because you figure that's only 4 years difference in the delivery. And the same company that trained in the Kansas City Scenic Company delivered the Santa Fe, New Mexico scenery. So that's where I would go personally. And I know they do public events there, but you can always ask for a tour. Say Wendy sent you.
Perfect. Looks like I got my next vacation destination. Well, Wendy, thank you so much for being a part of this tonight. It was so informative, and I'm so excited for the future of the Fox West Theater. And just thank you for being here with us and talking about that.
Well, thank you. I got drawn into this by Gregory Friesen, and between Gregory Friesen and Christopher Smith and Stephanie Backen, the enthusiasm and eagerness to do something right really rubs off. So my genuine excitement that I bring to the table is even accentuated by that, because there is such a passionate crew trying to work so hard for the preservation that you're very lucky with the staff that's on board right now, and all of the people who are involved. So you're very lucky. Congratulations.
And thank you. That's very nice of you to say. We're so excited for the future of the Fox West Theater, and thank you for being here tonight. Hopefully we can do another talk more about the scenery once it's all restored and beautiful and the Fox West is full of happy people. We can talk some more about the great job everyone did.
Even before that, I'd be willing to chat.
That sounds great. I'll call you as soon as the stream is done. Okay.
That sounds great.
And so that's basically the end of our community forum tonight. I want to thank everybody that's been a part of this. Holloway Video, Christopher Smith. I'd like to thank Dr. Wendy Barrett, who we were just talking with, and of course our Gregory Friesen, the head architect of this project. My name is Jay Gillespie. On behalf of everybody involved in the Fox West Theater, I want to thank you for watching this tonight, and we will see you for the next episode of Cougar Bugs. All right, y'all have a great night. Thanks so much.